You would think that 14 indictments would be sufficient to reform any kind of organization, except for the organization that governs the most beloved sport in the world, FIFA. But even after last week's arrests of 9 FIFA members, 4 marketing executives, and 1 banker, the organization went ahead and held elections on Friday, re-electing Sepp Blatter for a 5th term. But why are people surprised? One look at a 106-plus page indictment, and you can see that briberies and kickbacks have become part of a big game, how the games are organized. It all looks like it comes out of a Hollywood script. FIFA officials actually received envelopes stuffed with money, and in some cases, suitcases stuffed with some serious cash. But if last week's events are not enough proof that FIFA has an accountability issue, consider this. A Washington Post article argues that one of the consequences of the corruption is the numerous deaths of workers building the stadiums and sport venues in Qatar, where the World Cup will be held in 2022. Joining me to discuss the issue on the latest scandal is the writer of the article, Christopher Ingraham of the Washington Post. Thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
So I read your article over and over again because I was blown away that this wasn't what was making headline news. It was the fact that they somehow were able to abscond $150 million, and that's what started triggering outrage. How did you look at it from this angle and bring it all together?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, these death statistics that we see coming out of Qatar, we've known about these for a while now. The Guardian newspaper has been reporting on them for several years. Various trade organizations have been reporting them too. But in the end, it's interesting that it takes a Justice Department indictment and a lot of arrests and $150 million in corruption for Americans to pay attention. And you know, you look at these corruption charges and you say, okay, we have a case of rich, powerful guys making themselves more rich and more powerful. Kind of garden variety stuff, right? We're kind of cynical. We kind of think, okay, this is what happens in the upper echelons of society.
But your article's actually saying that, and they haven't confirmed this yet, but that there's a possibility that Qatar may have been part of that corruption, and that's how they got the bid.
Absolutely. So Swiss authorities are currently investigating Qatar right now to see to what extent bribery did play a role in that bid. And if that was the case, if Qatar's successful bid was related to this corruption, then there are some real-world consequences here that go far beyond these boardrooms of FIFA. So, and the big thing, the one that I focused on, is if you look at these worker statistics.
They're outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. So, in the past 4 years, since Qatar was awarded the World Cup, the International Trade Union Confederation estimates that there have been 1,200 migrant worker deaths in that country. We don't know exactly how many of those are related directly to stadium construction. Qatar is famously very cagey about these statistics. They will say that, oh, well, plenty of these people died from, say, heart attacks. There was a suspiciously high number of cardiac arrests. Well, is that somebody who just had a cardiac arrest because he was old, or is that somebody who was worked to exhaustion on the work site and went back to his quarters and he died there? There's really a lot of mystery surrounding this, which kind of makes it all the more troubling from a human rights perspective.
Well, and because the way they basically, Qatar, the way they practice their immigration laws is that they basically become, quote-unquote, owners. The employers become the owners of these individuals' papers. So it's not like they can, basically take their papers and walk freely and go to the next employer.
Absolutely. It's been likened to indentured servitude. You see this in a lot of Gulf states, and you see some moves toward reform. You see countries like Bahrain eliminating this system. But Qatar is still practicing it. Now, in light of all the criticism and these allegations, they have claimed over and over that they are going to reform the system, that they are going to make changes. They've said this over and over again. Human rights groups and various reporters who have been there have said that on the ground it doesn't look like there are any changes making place. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. So,
Christopher, I'm actually going to bring in also Rob Simmelkjaer from MSNBC Sports and host of... What are you hosts of?
Sports Matters.
Sports Matters, Rob. Thank you so much for joining us.
How are you?
So we have been talking here with Christopher a bit of how the corruption could possibly have led to Qatar winning the bid for the 2022 FIFA World Cup, and how that has actually impacted the way their worker care. But what's part of the broader story? What can we expect coming out of this? If they just re-elected the person for the 5th term that's basically been at the helm of one of the most massive corruption scandals in sports history?
Well, I think what you can expect is more, probably more indictments, to be honest, as time goes on. I think this is really just beginning. The U.S. Attorney's Office in New York made it clear that this is an ongoing investigation. You saw as well the Swiss authorities announcing at the time of those arrests last week that they were conducting their own criminal investigation as well in Switzerland, which is where FIFA is headquartered. So I think we're going to see more cooperation on behalf of whistleblowers who work for FIFA and others in the world of soccer who are aware of inappropriate, corrupt conduct. I think we're going to see more indictments. I think we're going to see more exposure, essentially, as to what's been going on. I really believe this is the tip of the iceberg.
Rob, so far, though, folks are going to feel like this is business as usual because they just reelected the same guy that was, again, at the helm of the corruption scandals. What can fans do? Is there anything that they can do to basically say the buck stops here?
Well, I think you've seen some fans speaking out about this. I think it's always tough, to be honest, in sports for fans to organize. You know, soccer is an incredibly popular sport, but I guess if I were a fan who felt strongly about this, I would probably be organizing, contacting sponsors in particular, and talking and letting sponsors know that that I, as a fan, felt they had a role to play in cleaning the sport up. We've seen some of the sponsors already come out and say they wanted to see real reform at FIFA, and sponsors do hold some real sway in this. I also think fans around the world can pressure their own national football organizations in the United States, U.S. Soccer, to say, hey, we want our national team to be playing in a sport that is being run the right way, run in a non-corrupt way. So, you know, I think fans certainly can speak out, but it's not easy for fans to organize and make a huge difference, I think, at least at this point.
Do you think, Christopher, that if fans started basically talking to folks about what's happening with the migrant deaths in Qatar, do you think that they could have an impact?
Certainly, a lot of people were very interested in that story, and there was a lot of very strong reaction to it. I would say that these charges, they create some space for this kind of conversation to happen, whereas before it was just a sense that whatever we say, nothing's going to happen because this organization is untouchable. Well, we've seen that that's not completely the case, and what we're seeing is that the news does appear to be circling around the president of FIFA. Whether that's going to result in any charges, we don't know. But interestingly, one of the things that's just launching this weekend is there's actually a FIFA-sponsored movie coming out about the organization.
That's going to be rich.
Yeah, no, it was produced by FIFA. It's coming out this weekend, I believe, on Amazon, and it paints Sepp Blatter, the president, as a champion of ethics and reform. So that movie and others like it are certainly going to be looked at a lot more skeptically in light of these revelations, and I think that creating that space for this kind of conversation, this kind of skepticism to happen is going to be, it's a good first step.
Interesting. And Rob, can you imagine with what's happening right now around FIFA? Can you imagine that in 2022 and the ones leading and the Cups were leading up to that we'll see any sort of transformational protests similar to what we saw in Brazil?
Well, I think that you may see protests around the world. I don't think you'll see protests in Qatar because Qatar is not a country that is really that's just not going to happen there, in my opinion. I think you could see some protesting around the world, but to be honest, I don't think you'll see anything of the scale that you saw in Brazil. And by the way, even in Brazil, you had those protests, but the event went on. The event actually went on in a reasonably successful way once the kickoff actually took place. So these protests sometimes are not very long-lived.
And so what can we expect coming out of this? Can we actually see all of a sudden the country's basically putting much more expectation on workers' rights? I mean, what can we expect given the... And I see this because I'm looking at the graph that you shared in your article, and when you look at Beijing, when you look at South Africa, the deaths are nowhere near. You could actually call those accidents versus the incredible, Qatar's leading folks heads and shoulders above the rest. What can we see coming out of this? Give me something hopeful.
Sure, yeah, I'm going to try. I mean, there's a number of things that we might hope for. I mean, looking at these deaths coming out of Qatar, if you're a fan of soccer, I mean, you might hope that You know, if you're watching soccer and if you're a fan in Qatar or if you're a worker in Qatar, you might know that there is, you know, that the situation isn't hopeful. On the other hand, it really speaks to the power structure in FIFA. If you look at that recent election of Sepp Blatter, if you looked at who voted for him, if you look at all the Western countries, Western Europe, the United States, Australia, they all voted for his competitor. But every other region of the world, Africa, South America, Asia, they all voted for Blatter. That shows that not only Blatter, but this entire system he's created, it still has a great deal of support among these different regions in the world. And that's because Blatter has been very good at shoring up his support while these things going on.
Right. And do you think, Rob, that the reason that he is good at shoring up the support is that he's also good at doling out the cash?
Well, I think that the structure of the organization is very advantageous to the incumbent because every single country, whether it's the Cayman Islands or the United States, gets one vote. And if you, as the head of FIFA, send cash to the Cayman Islands, you know, or other small developing countries, you're going to be rewarded for that. There's going to be gratitude for the various, you know, payments that have been made. And remember, the reason I think that Sepp Blatter has been above all of this is that he can say, and FIFA can say, that these were payments that were made for legitimate reasons. And by the way, they have a potentially a strong argument that these were. Well, when it's made in cash, that's obviously a little bit of a trickier story. But I mean, the goal of FIFA is to develop the sport of soccer around the world. And so as part of that, it is legitimate for them to be sending money to different football organizations around the world and then sort of step back, he might argue, and say, well, if the money that we sent, which was supposed to be used for legitimate soccer development, was actually used for illegitimate reasons, that's not something that we knew, that we could have known. I think that's the argument that you would hear him making if somebody would try to impute guilt to him specifically. But, you know, it's complicated, but the bottom line is it's a structure that is very well, really well entrenched for an incumbent to be there for a long time.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. Thank you so much, Christopher, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
By the way, you can watch Rob every Monday on his show, Sports Matters, right here on Shift.